He was the kind of man who built an empire from the ground up, the kind neighbors whispered about when his black Tesla slid past their driveways. Yet on that damp Seattle morning, with the scent of wet pine in the air, his life was seconds from ending, until a boy no one knew stepped out from the shadows. Mason was rail-thin, clothes torn, eyes wild with urgency. He shouted words that froze Ethan Caldwell's hand on the door handle. "Don't drive. She cut your brakes." A ridiculous claim, except Mason's voice cracked in a way that made you believe he'd seen something no one should. What would you do? Dismiss the warning, or let a stranger's panic dictate your next move? Stay with me, because the truth behind those words will turn everything you think you know about loyalty upside down. And if this story makes you rethink who you trust, hit that like button, share it, and subscribe, because the smallest voice can carry the loudest warning. The rain was still soft, just a whisper against the windshield, when Ethan stepped out of the garage. Chloe's voice drifted from somewhere upstairs, muffled, casual, asking if he'd be late for the meeting. He gave a quick reply without looking up, already adjusting his cufflinks, mind ticking through the day ahead. The Tesla's metallic black surface mirrored the faint morning light, pristine, perfect, rainwater streaking his dirt-smudged face. "Don't drive." The boy gasped again, softer this time, but no less fierce. The security guard moved in fast, muttering about trespassers. But Ethan raised a hand, eyes fixed on the boy. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that desperate stare. Somewhere above, the curtain in Chloe's window shifted, then stilled. And Ethan, without knowing why, felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the morning chill. The wipers swept in a slow, steady arc, the rubber blades hushing against glass, pushing the mist into thin silver ribbons. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, but his grip on the wheel had hardened, knuckles pale against the black leather. The city skyline blurred in the distance. His own car, its lifeline severed. He tried to bury it beneath the muted hum of tires on wet asphalt, the even purr of the motor, but it kept breaking through, the sound lodged in his ears. Not just the words, but the urgency behind them, the sharp edge of someone who'd already watched the worst happen. Ethan adjusted his tie, more to steady his hands than out of vanity, and drew in a slow breath. Chloe's voice from earlier floated back, casual, almost too casual. "Will you be late for the meeting?" At the time, it had meant nothing. Now, with only rain for company, it felt like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading further than he wanted. A green light winked ahead. He let the car roll slower, ignoring the irritated horn from a passing SUV. He wasn't in a hurry anymore. His gaze flicked to the side mirror, not to check for traffic, but to see if anything followed. Nothing but the mist, stretching behind him like a trail he couldn't read. For a moment, he considered flooring it, testing the machine beneath him, daring it to betray him. But the thought curdled in his chest. His foot eased off the accelerator until the hum softened and the rain's rhythm took over, tapping the roof in uneven beats. "Turn around." The thought was quiet, almost polite, but persistent. He clenched his jaw, drove another 100 yards, then, without giving himself time to argue, signaled and slipped onto the exit ramp. It felt deliberate, almost like rebellion, but against what he wasn't ready to name. The GPS chimed, offering a new route home. He muted it. The less noise, the better. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Chloe's silhouette lingered in the upstairs window, curtains shifting, her posture too still. His pulse slowed, but the tightness in his chest deepened, a pressure that had nothing to do with the drive. He pictured Mason, rain clinging to his hair, his hands gripping those iron bars, breath steaming in the cold air. That image stayed with him as the ramp curved back toward the city, as if the boy's warning had hooked itself into the wheel, pulling Ethan toward something he could no longer ignore. The Tesla's glossy black hood reflected the overhead LEDs as he stepped inside, shutting the door softly behind him. Rain still tapped at the roof, a muted rhythm above the hush. He crouched by the front wheel, the concrete cold against his knee, and ran a hand along the tire's curve. Smooth. Ordinary. He pulled out the small flashlight from the workbench, clicked it on, and aimed the beam beneath the chassis. Shadows stretched and shifted with every movement. Brake lines, steel and unbroken, gleamed faintly in the light. Nothing obvious. Nothing to justify the tight coil in his stomach. He exhaled, stood up slowly, and turned toward the workbench, fingers tapping restlessly on the wood. From upstairs, a faint creak, a footstep. He froze, head tilting toward the sound. Then silence, followed by the low hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Chloe knew he was back. He didn't like that thought. Not now. Without a word, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and scrolled to Mike's number. Mike always answered. "Need you to take a look at something," Ethan said when the line clicked open. His voice was steady, but it carried an edge. "No, not here. I'll bring it to you." He grabbed the keys again, this time moving quickly, his steps deliberate but silent. As the garage door rolled open, the cool, damp air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked asphalt. He eased the car out, not trusting the brakes enough to push, keeping his speed low until the street opened ahead. Behind him, the house loomed dark against the morning mist, Chloe's window a blank square of glass. He didn't look up. The turn on a main road felt like slipping out of a shadow he hadn't realized he was standing in. His hands relaxed just slightly on the wheel. He was heading to Mike's now, not for reassurance, but for the truth, whatever it was. And in his chest, under the steady thrum of the motor, something colder had begun to settle, a sense that the morning had already changed, and there was no turning it back. Mike's shop sat on the edge of an industrial strip in Renton, the kind of place where the air always carried the tang of steel, oil, and rain-soaked concrete. The big bay doors were half open, letting in a dull gray light that pooled across the stained floor. Ethan eased the Tesla inside, tires crunching over scattered grit. Mike looked up from a workbench, wiping his hands on a rag, his brow furrowing at the tension etched across Ethan's face. "Morning," Mike said, but his tone was more question than greeting. "Check the brakes," Ethan replied. The undercarriage gleamed in places, shadowed in others. Ethan stayed a few steps back, arms crossed, listening to the sharp click of tools and the steady drip of water from the wheel wells. Slice clean through. No fry, no host, no dobt. "This isn't wear and tear," Mike said slowly. "Somebody did this." Ethan stared at the cut. The metal edges were bright, fresh, like a wound that hadn't yet healed. A faint tang of brake fluid mixed with the shop air, sharp enough to sting his nose. He didn't hear Mason's voice in his head this time. Instead, he felt the memory like weight on his shoulders, pressing down until his jaw locked. "Replace everything," Ethan said at last, the words clipped. "And Mike, this doesn't leave the shop." Mike gave a single nod and turned back to his tools. Ethan stepped outside, letting the heavy door thud shut behind him. The rain had thickened, soaking the shoulders of his suit, running in cool rivulets down his neck. He stood there, unmoving, watching water snake along the gutter toward a rusted drain. His hands slid into his pockets, fingers curling tight, not against the cold, but against the truth settling in. Mason had been right. The boy hadn't exaggerated, hadn't guessed, he'd known. And if he'd known this, anything that didn't belong, nothing. Still, the sensation of being watched trailed him like a shadow. He took a slow breath, then pulled out his phone. There was one more conversation he needed to have today, and it wasn't going to wait. Ethan found Mason 2 hours later, hunched on a splintered bench near the far edge of Gasworks Park. The boy's hood was pulled low, shoulders tucked against the wind rolling in off Lake Union. A paper bag sat beside him, its contents barely touched. When Ethan approached, Mason's eyes flicked up. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Mason's voice was thin but steady. He talked about wandering near the neighborhood the night before, looking for recyclables. How he'd seen a light in Ethan's garage long past midnight. Chloe had been there, moving quickly, bending over the front of the car. And then another sound, metal snapping. I didn't know her name. Mason said, but I saw her face in the light when she turned. She saw me too. That's when I ran. Ethan studied him. The boy wasn't embellishing, wasn't stumbling over details. Every word sat heavy in the air. Why warn me? Ethan asked. For the first time, Mason met his eyes. Because nobody warned my parents. Their brakes failed on the I-5 when I was 7. Somebody cut them. We didn't even make it to the hospital. His voice cracked, but he didn't look away. The wind whipped off the lake, carrying the damp scent of rain and rusted metal. Thumbs working at the frayed threads like he could pull himself out of the memory if he kept them moving. Ethan stayed silent too, letting the space between them fill with the sound of the wind skimming over the water. When it happened, Mason began finally, his voice low. I was in the back seat. We were driving to my aunt's place in Tacoma. My dad was laughing at something Mom said, and then he stopped, his throat working. There was this sound, like a snap, and then he pressed the brakes. Nothing happened. Mom grabbed my hand, and we went off the road. He didn't describe the crash. He didn't have to. Ethan could see it in the way the boy's eyes glazed, fixed on something far away and awful. The cops said it was an accident. Mason went on. But my uncle, he used to work on cars, said the brake line was cut. No one got caught. No one even looked. His gaze hardened. When I saw her in your garage, I knew I couldn't just walk away. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You realize what you've done, Mason? If you're right, if she saw you. She saw me. Mason cut in, quick and certain. She was holding this red tool, like pliers, but sharper. When the light hit her face, he broke off, shivering. It's the same look I caught through your window this morning. The kind that freezes you before you know why. A gust came off the lake, tossing Ethan's hair, making Mason pull the hood tighter around his face. You can't go back to wherever you've been sleeping, Ethan said, his tone low but certain. If she's ready to cross that line once, she won't hesitate to cross it again. Mason's eyes narrowed. Why do you care? Ethan almost laughed, but the sound caught before it left his throat. Because you stepped in when no one else would. And because I know the weight of speaking the truth and being met with silence. For a long beat, they just looked at each other, the rain misting between them. Then Ethan stood. Come on. There's something I need to check, and you're coming with me. Mason hesitated, then grabbed the paper bag, tucking it under his arm. Where? Ethan glanced toward the skyline, his jaw set. Home. The boys' steps were reluctant at first, but as they left the park, Ethan noticed how Mason kept close to his side, like part of him already knew there was no going back to the life he'd had yesterday. The drive back was quiet, the hum of the tires filling the space where questions could have been. Mason sat angled toward the window, watching the rain smear the streetlights in long ribbons of gold. Ethan's mind was elsewhere, on the garage, on the lines under the Tesla, on Chloe's face the moment she realized he'd turned around earlier that morning. When they reached the house, Ethan killed the headlights before pulling into the driveway. The place loomed against the dark sky, its windows glowing soft and warm, the kind of welcome that felt too rehearsed. He motioned for Mason to stay put, then stepped out into the drizzle, his shoes crunching against the wet gravel. Inside, the scent of polished wood and faint lavender hung in the air. Ethan moved straight to his study, Mason trailing behind now, silent but alert. He shut the door, crossed to the desk, and woke the monitor with a tap of his finger. Motion detected in the garage. He clicked it open. The grainy image filled the screen. Chloe, in a pale sweater, slipping into the garage with a small red tool in hand. Her movements were quick, glancing over her shoulder once before bending over the front of the car. A moment later, another figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall, broad-shouldered. Ethan leaned closer. Even in the blur of the camera, the jawline was unmistakable. Derek, Ethan said under his breath. Mason looked at him. Who's Derek? My half-brother, Ethan replied, eyes never leaving the screen. The man handed Chloe a thick envelope. She counted quickly, tucked it into her sweater, and nodded. Derek said something too quiet for the mic to catch before leaving through the side door. This wasn't just betrayal. It was coordination. He sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. Mason's voice cut through the hum of the computer fan. So what now? Ethan's eyes shifted to the boy, tapping against the window like a clock counting down. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the study long after Mason had curled up on the couch in the living room. Every angle of Derek's posture. By the time the rain stopped, he knew what he had to do. Just after 9 the next evening, he made the call. His voice was calm, the words deliberate. "Come by the house," he told Chloe. "We need to talk. Derek should be here too." She didn't ask why. That told him more than any answer could. When the doorbell rang, Ethan opened it to find them standing side by side. Chloe's hair was perfect, her smile thin, wary. Derek wore a leather jacket, the same cocky smirk he'd had since they were kids. "Nice place," Derek said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. Ethan led them into the living room. Mason was gone. Ethan had made sure of that hours ago. On a coffee table, studying the video like it was someone else's life. When it ended, Ethan closed the laptop with a soft click. "You cut my brake lines," he said evenly. Chloe's lips parted, the beginnings of a denial on her tongue, but Derek beat her to it. "We did what had to be done," he said, voice dripping with the same smugness he'd carried his whole life. "The board trusts me more. After the accident, I'd have control. Clean. Simple." Chloe glanced at him sharply, as if she hadn't expected him to say it out loud. "Derek," she started, but he just shrugged. Ethan stood, the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. "You think you're the only one who can plan ahead?" A sharp knock rattled the front door before either of them could respond. Derek's smirk faltered. Chloe's eyes darted toward the sound. Ethan didn't move until the knock came again, followed by a voice announcing itself. Calm, authoritative. "Seattle PD. Open the door." Ethan stepped aside. By the time the red and blue lights faded from the windows, the house felt unbearably still. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Mason appeared from the kitchen, clutching a mug of hot chocolate that looked oversized in his hands. "They're gone," the boy asked. "They won't be back," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but there was a raw edge under it. Mason nodded slowly, like he was still processing the idea that two people could walk into a house one evening and leave in handcuffs. He set the mug down carefully on a coffee table, then sat on the edge of the couch. Ethan took the armchair across from him. "You got somewhere to go tonight?" Mason gave a short, humorless laugh. "If I did, I wouldn't be here." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then you stay here. Just for now. We'll figure out the rest later." The boy's gaze flicked up, suspicious but curious. "What?" Ethan hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud felt heavier than he expected. "Because you stepped in when no one else would. Because you reminded me that trust has to be earned, and you've earned mine." Mason didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. Over the next few days, the house began to shift in small ways. A second toothbrush appeared in the bathroom. A pair of worn sneakers rested by the door. The smell of instant noodles drifted from the kitchen late at night. Ethan noticed Mason still kept his backpack close. Ethan drove him to a small clothing store in Fremont. "Pick what you need," he said simply, and Mason's eyes darted between the racks like he couldn't quite believe it was real. When they left, Mason carried a small bag with 2 shirts, a jacket, and a pair of jeans. Not much, but more than he'd had in a long time. That night, as the rain returned, Ethan passed the living room and saw Mason asleep on the couch, the blankets slipping to the floor. He bent to pull it back over the boy's shoulders, pausing for a moment to study the calm on his face. The air was crisp the next morning, the kind of early winter chill that carried the scent of wet cedar and distant salt from the sound. Ethan stood on the Fremont Bridge, elbows resting on the cool green rail, watching the water churn below. Mason leaned beside him, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his new jacket, eyes tracking the slow passage of a tugboat beneath. They hadn't spoken much on a walk here. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the kind of quiet that came when words weren't needed to fill the space. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't said anything?" Ethan asked, his gaze still fixed on the water. Mason's shoulders rose and fell. "Every day," Ethan nodded, leaning back against the rail. "Not anymore. You've got choices now. A place to sleep, a shot at something better. That's more than I had at your age." They watched in silence as the tugboat disappeared under the far span. The morning light caught on the ripples it left behind, a shimmer that faded almost as quickly as it came. Mason spoke again. Mason let a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. They started back toward the house, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. Near the corner, Ethan slowed, his voice low but firm. Remember this, Mason. The smallest voice can stop the biggest disaster. You prove that. Don't forget it. The boy didn't answer right away, but the way he looked ahead, steady, unflinching, was enough. As they reached the front gate, Ethan glanced toward the camera mounted above it. He knew it was recording, capturing this moment the way it had captured every secret before. Think about the times you've brushed someone off because they didn't fit your idea of who mattered. One day, their words might be the only thing standing between you and the edge. What'd you do then? Share your thoughts below. And if this story made you see trust and second chances a little differently, like it, share it, and make sure you're subscribed. You never know when the next warning will come.